think for me, I never really looked at video games and movies as even close cousins.
Cinema was cinema, and video games were video games. You know, they're quite different mediums, and you get different kind of enjoyment out of them.
Les jeux vidéo adaptés au cinéma, c'est comme une très longue chute qui n'en finit pas, quoi.
People have no idea how blind we were. We were at the cutting edge of this whole revolution.
I think gaming can go anywhere, story-wise. I think it all depends on where creators want to take it.
Cinema is going to change radically, and it needs to. I believe Hollywood 1.0 is dying. Hollywood 2.0 is going to be something completely new and different.
I remember going to the arcade one day, and there was this huge crowd of kids had gathered around this big black monolith at the back of the arcade. And it was kind of like the scene from 2001 where the monolith suddenly appears, and all the kids were like the apes staring up at this thing. And it was the very first Space Invaders machine. And I queued for like an hour to have the opportunity to pour my money into this machine for about 5 minutes, and then I was broke. I ended up walking home in the rain that night because I'd spent all of my bus fare.
I grew up playing video games, and so my natural inclination is to express story through interactive entertainment. Space Invaders, you know, one of the first games I played when I was a kid, it had a really simple story. You were a spaceship, there were aliens, you had little fortresses, and they were trying to kill you, and you had to stop them to save whatever world you were saving. It wasn't more complicated than that, but that was the story. It was a reason to take heroic action.
So in a way, in my mind, you know, I'd kind of like invented Independence Day, or my 10-year-old version of Independence Day, you know, just from playing Space Invaders. You know, I had dreams of these kind of alien spaceships coming down and me trying to destroy them. So I didn't really need characters to kind of come up with a story and impose a story on it.
Ma passion jeux vidéo a commencé avec Pong. J'avais une machine Pong à la maison, donc voilà, on est dans les années 70. Le Big Bang du jeu vidéo, la naissance du jeu vidéo, c'est Pong. La naissance commerciale de ce secteur, c'est Pong. Il y a littéralement une explosion. Le mot Big Bang n'est pas pour rien. Partant de là, Atari tente d'acheter les droits des Dents de la Mer de Jaws. Refus, parce qu'à ce moment-là, je pense que le studio ne voit pas les répercussions, ne voit pas l'argent qui peut se faire. Et Atari va tricher un petit peu et va sortir un jeu d'arcade qui s'appelle Shark Jaws. Le Shark en tout petit, évidemment, et le Jaws en énorme. Donc, ce qui fait que le studio n'a pas pu porter plainte, ou en tout cas n'a pas pensé à porter plainte contre Atari pour vol de droit ou vol de film. Et donc, à partir de là, on commence à voir poindre une relation, c'est assez étrange, entre les studios hollywoodiens et ce jeu vidéo.
Actually, at the time that I made Tron, that was I was more into video games than any other time in my life. Because at the time, video games were exceedingly graphic, and that's what I liked about them. So I think that the video games we played that were like wireframe games like Battlezone, Jeff and I used to play that, and it felt like the movie we were making. And right around that time, I also went to MIT and saw a test reel of computer animation for the first time. Those images just seemed to me, this is clearly the future, and it lent itself to me to a classic art approach because it was all designed with basic shapes. And when you learn to draw in art school, you start with basic shapes for the human figure. So it seemed inevitable that eventually this technology was going to be doing, you know, characters and all sorts of architectural things. And then in doing research on this subject matter, I started to meet the people that worked with this technology. So I started to meet people that were working on computer graphics or people that were doing software design. And as I met them, I was shocked at how, far out they were, that they believed in this frontier that hadn't arrived yet, that was going to be this wonderful place. That there was a lot of idealism at the time. People have no idea how blind we were, because the tools that we were using were going to create that style. There was no way to mimic that technique and say, this is what the movie is going to really look like, or this is what the CG is really going to look like. So we did, of course, we did production designs where we tried to mimic what the techniques were going to look like, and we did it, with paint. But in the end, we weren't even close. What happened was we saw the images for the first time ourselves, and we blew our own minds. I was surprised at the reaction to the film. I thought that people would be more open-minded to it. And I'd never anticipated that it was really going to be taken as a threat. It was the enemy within for many reasons. I mean, the animation people at Disney absolutely hated Tron because we were going to use computers to do animation. And there was literally this attitude that we were like vampires or gargoyles, that we had to be stamped out before this could get a foothold. So we became a bit of a, an enemy to the status quo.
À l'époque, c'était abstrait, tu vois, c'est des 1 et des 0. L'informatique, c'est super compliqué à rendre visuel et attrayant, quoi. Et autant quand tu vois Tron, tu te dis, waouh, j'ai envie de me plonger dans cet univers-là et de voir ce qu'il y a dans ce monde qu'on n'arrive pas vraiment à se figurer. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de gens qui se sont intéressés à l'informatique grâce à Tron. Moi, j'ai discuté avec plein d'amis à moi qui ont pu faire de la programmation ou quoi, et qui me parlent tous de Tron comme d'une référence infaillible, hein. Ça a fait entrer aussi le jeu vidéo et l'informatique dans la culture populaire comme quelque chose de cool.
And of all the video games that have been made on Tron, the first one was the most successful. It was so successful that the profits from the video game pretty much covered the cost of making the movie. That audience didn't need a movie that reassured their parents. Everybody today says, I like movies that make me feel like a kid again. Well, you were 10 years old when you saw Tron. You didn't need to feel like a kid again because you already were a kid. In some ways, when you're 10 years old, you were enticed by a movie that your parents say, if this is the future, I don't want it. Because you don't want your parents' world, you want your world.
Et il y a une vraie rupture, je pense, générationnelle à ce moment-là. Je pense que pour les générations précédentes, c'était plus le rock qui a joué ce rôle-là. Nous, ça a été, en tout cas, une partie de cette génération, ça a été le jeu vidéo.
People at Disney realized, holy cow, we were at the cutting edge of this whole revolution.
J'ai plus vécu l'arrivée du jeu vidéo comme voilà, ça se jouait dans les fêtes foraines, quoi. C'était vraiment le truc du populaire par excellence, quoi. Il y a eu quelques films aux alentours de la fin des années 70, début 80, qui ont été déterminants dans la façon avec laquelle le jeu vidéo allait se construire. En tant que cinéphile, évidemment, je voyais les sources d'influence de ces jeux d'arcade des années 80. Il est évident que quand je voyais mes copains jouer à Double Dragon, je pensais aux Guerriers de la Nuit. Idem pour New York 97, dont on pouvait voir des références partout dans les jeux de cette époque.
Même si c'était pas des adaptations stricto sensu des films, c'était des trucs très libres. Comme ça reprenait des gimmicks un peu archétypaux du cinéma d'action de cette époque-là, eh ben, t'avais l'impression de faire bouger les films, quoi, en fait, et de les contrôler, quoi.
Mais bon, soyons honnêtes, si ton plaisir est avant tout esthétique et narratif, bah, Double Dragon, ça n'arrive pas à la cheville des Guerriers de la Nuit, en termes de ressenti, en termes d'émotion, en termes d'engagement. Je voyais ça comme quelque chose d'un peu gadget, quelque chose d'un peu périphérique à ce que j'aimais. Et curieusement, ce qui m'a vraiment fait complètement basculer dans le jeu vidéo, c'est peut-être le jeu le moins cinétique possible, qui est le Super Mario.
When the Nintendo came out, you know, just like everyone else, I was mesmerized by Zelda and Mario Brothers, and I got a copy of Nintendo Power magazine. And, you know, a lot of the magazine was tips and tricks of how to, you know, secret levels and things like that. And it showed how the artists drew. And I do this because I had no concept that there were video game artists. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, somebody has to draw these characters and then they put them into the game. So from that point on, you know, I kind of thought, well, my dream as a kid was always to be an animator for Walt Disney. But I thought, well, I'll also do video games.
J'ai toujours été fasciné, déjà en tant que cinéphile, par la simplicité du talent, c'est-à-dire vraiment les gens qui arrivent de la façon la plus évidente, la plus simple possible, à faire des choses incroyablement évocatrices. Et à mon sens, c'est ce que Miyamoto a réussi à faire avec les Super Mario, c'est-à-dire que c'est des jeux d'une prise en main immédiate qui accompagnent le joueur, en fait. C'est-à-dire que quand on voit ce qu'un gamin de 6 ans est capable de faire sur un Super Mario au bout d'une dizaine d'heures de jeu, c'est complètement hallucinant. La façon avec laquelle il arrive à installer un univers qui a ses propres codes, ses propres références, sa propre logique, l'air de ne pas y toucher, je trouve ça absolument extraordinaire. Moi, j'irais jusqu'à le comparer à un Méliès. Hein. On est vraiment, à l'époque en tout cas, en présence d'un type qui, sans forcément s'en rendre compte, est en train de poser les bases d'un langage.
Nintendo nous envoie dans un autre monde et celui-là qui marque une rupture encore plus grande, c'est-à-dire que Mario va devenir aussi connu que Mickey. Donc là, c'est le jeu vidéo qui va commencer à prendre la main.
C'est la première fois que les Américains sont mis face à une création japonaise qui dépasse en notoriété leur identité, parce que Mickey, c'est les États-Unis, bordel. Donc il y a quand même un mouvement de panique de qu'est-ce que c'est que ce machin. Et il y a cette idée de tout de suite capitaliser sur ce qui a priori est un succès garanti.
The big difference between a game and a movie is the audience. I mean, it's a game. You're not going to get the same kinds of benefits you get out of being a participant who can affect the outcome of the movie. And that may be why, that potentially because of the loss of interactivity, that motion picture versions of video games are dangerous. Super Mario Brothers, I mean, with Rocky and Annabelle, who got to make the decision as directors of the movie. I had many communications with Rocky and Annabelle concerning script notes, because the script was constantly getting rewritten by myriad different writers, as you know.
It was obvious from the start there was literally no way to take the source material. There was no story in the source material other than you rescue a princess. They tried a version that was very literal, and they got really far along in this process. They had a script, they had an art department working on it, they had the you know, they carved out talking blocks, you know, that were going to talk, and they had this sort of very literal Super Mario world. They scrapped all of this work, and actually before that, they had spent $1 million on another draft from a writer named Ron Bass, who did Rain Man, and he did this, like, completely divorced from the game, existential road trip movie with two brothers. I mean, it was like Rain Man. It was like we joked about it as Drain Man, because it was so similar to Rain Man.
Parker Bennett and Terry Runty, who were trying to play catch up on the script, which was going in many directions at once, were at a disadvantage at the end of the day, because once the movie starts shooting and the script is constantly getting revised, it's really hard to control it.
Rocky and Annabelle told us very specifically at the start, we don't play the game, we're not that interested in the game. There's all of these fans of the game, like it can't be nothing like the game.
They wanted to do something edgy. Now that they were hired to do something edgy, something different.
So we were kind of a little bit fighting with the directors all the time, like, well, why don't we put this in? It'll be these cash boxes that they hit and a coin will come out.
I arrived after the first day of shooting, and I ran into one of the producers who said, "Mark, can I have a talk with you?" He said, "I won't beat around the bush. I think we're in trouble." It's just one of those things where the movie spun out of control and became something that nobody could control.
There's the weirdest thing that happens when you make a movie, and
you enter a bubble, and you are very like you have no idea, and you know you have no idea. So you're at a certain point, you're like, you've been looking at this stuff so long that you can't tell. You had this sort of like vague hope, like, oh, maybe.
You know, I think it's a very interesting movie, but I can see why the audiences didn't respond to it. It's a little distant, a little cold. The lizard world is completely depressing.
We had a premiere screening in Chicago when the movie came out. And when your own mother comes out of a movie and tells you it's the worst movie she's ever seen, you have an idea that maybe this isn't exactly how you wanted it to come out.
You know, it's hard in hindsight to look back and figure out what could have been done differently. I don't know. I really have no solution for how to fix that movie.
On est dans une adaptation chaotique, totalement chaotique, avec Nintendo qui effectivement donne quelques règles en disant bah voilà, là ça c'est la Bible, il faut mettre ça. Eux qui se disent oui mais nous il faut faire de l'argent, donc on va mettre du dinosaure, c'est la mode, on va assombrir, on va mettre un vrai méchant, et puis on a une catastrophe industrielle.
I think having a knowledge of the video game, of the source material, is incredibly important. And that's always shocked me in a lot of video game adaptations, is that the directors will quite often in press, you know, say that they never played the game. They can't even be bothered to lie about it. And, you know, and I think that's a terrible mistake because, you know, you would never dream of adapting a book without reading the book.
Pour moi, c'est impossible de faire un film live de Mario. C'est-à-dire que je vois même pas comment c'est pensable parce que c'est pas fait pour exister dans le vrai monde. Mario, il est pensé et tout son univers est pensé autour d'idées de jeux vidéo. Tout l'univers de Mario, et là, les 3/4 des gens disent que l'univers est absurde, il n'est pas absurde. Il est tout à fait parfait pour un jeu vidéo parce qu'il est réfléchi là-dessus. Quand tu te dis je vais adapter un jeu vidéo en cinéma, il y a un espèce d'équilibre chelou à trouver entre ne pas non plus trop coller au jeu parce que les intrigues sont plus simples souvent et que les personnages sont plus archétypaux, en même temps pas trop s'en écarter parce que sinon tu risques de perdre le public du truc. C'est beaucoup plus complexe que ce qu'on peut penser.
They announced they were looking to make a movie of Street Fighter. And the deal was the Capcom was coming here and they were interviewing producers. The producer who was doing the animated show and said, listen, are you familiar with this game? And I said, yes, my kids have put like their college education in the machine with quarters. And I need to pick like 6 or 7 characters. And they said, well, we'd like everybody to be in it. And I said, well you know, you have so many characters. I think you have 22 characters here. And if the movie's 100 minutes long, do the math. Cammy, Chun-Li, Sagat, Bison, Guile, Ken, Ryu, Balrog. It would have been 8 characters. But then once I was in, as I started writing it, they kept saying, can you add another character? Can you add another character? And at the end, at the 11th hour, they put everybody in. I think there's like 18 people in the movie. But because we hadn't planned on having it in, it's in there in a very weak way. You lose.
T'es fan de Street Fighter, donc tu te dis bon bah je vais aller voir le Street Fighter qu'on nous propose et ça ne correspond tellement pas. Ça fait des intrigues qui n'ont pas de sens, moi tu vois. Enfin, comment autant de gens si différents ont pu se retrouver au même endroit pour vivre cette aventure-là. Le fait est que ces personnages-là ont pas lieu de vivre ensemble, tu vois. Tu vois, enfin bon, ton caméraman il fait de la boxe, certes. T'as plein de trucs comme ça qui s'enchaînent.
When we were making the movie, Fai Long had not appeared yet, but they had planned on Fai Long was about to come out within a few months of the game. Are you kidding? Adding one more? Where am I going to put him? And he was put into the movie literally like the last day of filming in Thailand. If they had said up front, okay, we accept your argument, but we have a new character coming up. Can you plan from day one on this character, Fai Long, being in the movie? Then Fai Long could have had a great, important role in the movie. Fai Long could have been the Doctor Without Borders, right? And he hasn't been fighting. And they said, and later at the end of the movie, when he karates the hell out of everybody, somebody could say, why didn't you like karate people earlier in the movie? And he says, because it was more important to save lives while we were in prison. They'll go, wow, and they go, oh, the audience would love that. So believe me, I could have done a great job with Fai Long. Just let me know before Tuesday.
And people started to think that maybe video game movies don't work. You know, it was an invalid subject matter to take and try and transfer into a film.
It didn't cross my mind. I didn't buy into the idea that video game cannot be adapted into motion pictures because the strangest things have become motion pictures. One of the most popular American movies called It's a Wonderful Life was based on a greeting card Now, not the regular greeting card, you know, your grandmother sends you with money for your birthday, but like it was one of these special greeting cards that had like 15 pages, you know what I mean? A short story. But still, it was a greeting card.
I think saying you can't make a successful movie out of a video game is just wrong. I mean, you know, years ago, people didn't think you could make a successful movie out of a novel or out of a play or out of anything else. It's just video games were new. The Terminator 2 pinball machine became the most successful arcade game in history until I got a phone call, just friendly, from some of my friends at Midway saying, hey, we're testing a game that is testing so well in a Chicago arcade, it looks like it's going to beat your record of Terminator 2. And I said, well, we can't have that. I went to see them, and I played the Mortal Kombat arcade game, there's one right behind you, and I played it in their offices. It was still testing, and I thought, holy crap, this is Enter the Dragon meets Star Wars.
I was a huge fan of Mortal Kombat, the video game. I played it in the arcades in London. While I was playing the game, I could clearly see the influences of movies in it. You know, I always said it was like a cross between Enter the Dragon and something like a Ray Harryhausen movie. So it was kind of like Enter the Dragon meets Jason and the Argonauts. You know, these characters who go on a quest on a boat, they go to a mysterious island, they fight monsters. I mean, it was great. I thought that was great, great subject matter.
Mortal Kombat, we thought it was really two things. It was A, a visual blast, and B, at its core, I believe and still believe Mortal Kombat is about empowerment. I went to local arcades in those days, and little 10-year-old kids would look up at me and they'd slam a quarter down and they'd challenge me, and they'd always beat me. I mean, I completely sucked at playing it. You know, you hear the voice say, you know, flawless victory to them. Victory. And the kid was so empowered. So not only is martial arts empowering, the game was empowering people because now a 10-year-old could beat me.
I was very influenced by Hong Kong movies. I felt that Hong Kong fight style had not been done in a mainstream American movie, not since kind of Bruce Lee was a movie star, really. And I felt there was a real opportunity to kind of bring that Hong Kong fight style and do it in an American film.
We really, really, really were true to the martial arts. Some of those fights took 10 days just to shoot. And the studio was always saying, come on, shoot the fight, shoot the fight. No, to us, the fights were everything.
En fait, tu sens dans Mortal Kombat que le mec qui fait le film est en train de se marrer vraiment à faire le film. Et c'est un truc que tu ressens très rarement. Le film se prend pas au sérieux, quoi. Il sait ce qu'il est, il sait ce qu'il vaut, il est pas en train de dire je vais adapter le jeu de ouf. C'est un jeu qui de toute façon se prend pas au sérieux, qui est un peu dans la déconne et dans la bourrinerie, quoi.
I kind of felt that Mortal Kombat should have humor in it. I felt like it was the kind of movie that people were they wanted to laugh. And they would, you'd better make them laugh with the movie, otherwise they're gonna laugh at the movie. And Christophe Lambert was hysterical. I mean, he's a very funny man. He's very underrated as a comedian.
I wanted the God and Protector of Earth in my mind. I wanted him to like hamburgers and babes and funny things, and that was Chris.
I think the success of the movie took everyone by surprise. I mean, I always felt we were making an awesome movie, but making a great movie and having a successful movie are two different things. And actually, it was a #1 movie in America for 3 weeks, and then in Canada for 4 weeks. I mean, it kind of lasted. It was a great, great moment. It didn't open up the floodgates for video game adaptations, though, and I think the reason for that is, you know, it was 1 for 4 at that point. It had been 3 failures and 1 success. You know, that was the exception that proves the rule that video game movies don't work.
Le jeu vidéo a bien du mal à s'adapter en film parce que les desiderata, on va dire, des studios hollywoodiens sont pas du tout les mêmes. Eux, ils veulent faire leur truc, ils sont sûrs de leur truc. Ils se disent, on n'a rien à apprendre du petit frère ou de la petite sœur jeu vidéo.
The Wing Commander movie was a huge learning. I mean, it was the first movie I made, and you know, when I was doing Wing Commander 3 and 4, I was one of the biggest game designers in the business. So I had the biggest budget, I had the support, I had the time, and I could do it right. I was just this promising kid that had done this game that was successful, and they were going to give me a shot at doing this movie. And when we started on the movie, we sort of rushed into the shooting. The budget was, you know, It was like $25 million back then, which isn't a small budget, but if you were doing this kind of sci-fi movie, the budget back then would have probably been about $50 million or so, so it was about half what. So we were already having to cut some corners. Fox, in some ways, were also didn't understand the audience, and so they thought the audience was younger, and so they deliberately wanted to cast younger. The fans, you know, they were used to Mark Hamill, they were used to older characters playing these roles, and I do think that it was disappointing for me. I wasn't happy with the movie when it was finished myself.
J'ai découvert Hitman en jouant à Silent Assassin, donc c'était le numéro 2. J'aime bien le procédé de s'immerger, je trouve que le personnage est hyper charismatique et je trouve que la façon dont tu as de jouer qui est de l'anti-bourrin, c'est-à-dire que justement tu dois tuer le moins de personnes, te faire moins repérer, je trouvais ça génial. Moi j'essaye de faire un film d'infiltration, respecter à fond les codes, la lumière, l'univers du jeu. Été 2007 sort le 3e Bourne. Et le 3e Bourne cartonne, mais c'est un film d'action non-stop, ça ne s'arrête jamais. Et nous, on a un film un peu contemplatif d'infiltration. Forcément, les mecs du studio en face, ils voient ça, ils se disent non, mais on veut la même efficacité qu'un Bourne. Donc moins violent, dans le Bourne, t'as pas une goutte de sang. Nous, on était à Quicksilver Baller à transpercer les mecs avec des énormes gerbes de sang. Et tu parles avec le scénariste. Le scénariste, c'est Skip Woods, qui a fait Opération Espadon et Die Hard 4. Et le mec, il est tout buldy-buldé, il tape sur sa machine à écrire avec 2 doigts, et tu te dis, bah c'est mort.
I was deferring to what I was being told. I was, okay, well, I'm not sure about that, but I trust you because you guys make movies more than me. And I sort of went with these, and my internal instinct was, I'm not sure about this.
Ils ont fait leur film d'action avec un peu de conspirationnisme dedans. Le personnage est piégé, mais franchement, tu comprends rien.
You know, when I do my game stuff, even if EA says we want this or want that, I generally said, no, this is the way it needs to be. And they're like, okay, Chris. I don't look at a game and go, you know, oh, well, we'll put this feature in for this audience and this feature for this audience. I make a game based on what I want to play.
Ils s'achètent une licence, ils l'achètent pas pour les gamers. Ils l'achètent parce qu'ils ont un concept de film, un personnage, mais ils veulent l'offrir, ils veulent le réinventer pour un public beaucoup plus large. Et donc, au bout d'un moment, bah, y a une dichotomie entre le studio et moi, puis ça clash.
So it was a learning experience. That's, you know, these things are.
Anyway, years go by, and I get this phone call. And it's Larry Gordon. He says, Steve, you know this game, Tomb Raider? And I said, yes. He says, well, I got the rights to make this movie. I got notes from, one note I got is, well, shouldn't you be looking for a lost expedition first? Shouldn't they tell her that the lost expedition went out, but we don't know what happened to them and follow them? I think you really have to do that. So we go, why? And so this executive says, because every time she goes to another level, she finds ammunition and first aid packages. Now, how could there be first aid packages, ammunition, weapons lying around the middle of the jungle unless it got left behind by a previous expedition? So I actually was ready to say, are you fucking, you know, and Larry Gordon actually kicked me under the table. This is a guy who's like, you know, he's 80 years old now, but still, this is like, you know, he's like 70 years old, you know, going, of course, you know, that's the video game part of it. And then I go, okay, so I said, yes, we'll deal with that. And they say, also, another thing, and then this executive feels so smart, says, also another thing, I noticed it's very important in the game, you always have to reload your weapons, so you have to make sure that's in the movie. And I said, yes, I will definitely. Oh, you mean, yeah, we'll definitely. I'll make you. Let me write. Yeah, definitely. We'll show her reloading her guns. You know.
En fait, pour moi, si je devais synthétiser les problèmes vraiment des films adaptés de jeux vidéo, t'as l'impression, j'ai souvent eu l'impression en tout cas, que les personnes qui le faisaient n'avaient pas vraiment compris les jeux parce qu'ils en étaient restés à une lecture superficielle du jeu. Et en fait, ils avaient regardé que le moteur graphique. Et ils ont juste regardé le moteur graphique en se disant bah, le jeu raconte ça. Mais en fait, non, le jeu raconte jamais que ça. Il faut pousser le truc en allant jusqu'à comprendre ce que tu ressens en jouant. C'est-à-dire que par exemple, Tomb Raider, moi le premier Tomb Raider, ce qui m'intéressait, c'était pas que c'était une nana super forte et cool et poseuse, mais c'est que tu découvrais des endroits en fait, et que t'étais paumé, t'es tout seul, il y a quasiment pas d'humains dans le premier Tomb Raider, tu te bats que contre des animaux. Tu découvres des temples. Et il y a ce côté contemplatif qu'effectivement tu ne peux pas saisir si tu te contentes juste de lire des brochures et de regarder des bandes annonces. Il faut absolument jouer au jeu pour comprendre que ouais, à ce moment-là, tu vas entrer dans une grande salle et tu vas prendre conscience de l'espace, etc. Ça, tu peux le traduire par des outils de cinéma en essayant de réfléchir à l'effet produit sur le joueur. Mais si tu te contentes de prendre le personnage de Lara Croft qui a des flingues, etc. et qui saute, et parce que dans le jeu tu peux sauter et tirer en même temps, si tu ne prends que ça et que tu n'adaptes que ça veut dire que tu es dans une espèce de logique de communication, quoi, de marketing.
One of the subsequent writers, who was a friend of mine, said, Simon West said the strangest thing to me in a meeting once. He says, they said, you know, there's no tomb raiding in this movie until almost the end of the movie. He says, yes, it's exactly my plan. So, you know, he had a vision.
Up to that point, licensed or video game adaptation movies were just not good.
Il y a quelques exceptions, mais j'ai jamais vu de grands films tirés de jeux vidéo, quoi. Ça m'est pas encore arrivé.
People thought I was crazy to do another video game adaptation. Not so now. You know, we live in a world where Resident Evil has made $1 billion. So obviously, you know, it makes sense to do these adaptations.
Ooh, you like it harder.
But I think studios are still wary of them because more often than not, they fail.
What was interesting about video games is right from the beginning, there was a cognitive, interactive component. So even if they were diabolically simple, they still involved reason and thinking and hand and eye coordination and versus the passivity of live action cinema, which is you just react emotionally. There's something about video games that appeals to people that still want to use their cognition. So people say, well, why haven't the video games and the cinema merged perfectly? One is just catering 100% to your emotions, and where cinema has gone, like in the large comic book movies, is more and more feeling-based and emotion-based and less cognitive.
For the Halo movie project with Peter Jackson, I was a consultant on the project. And we never really found the perfect combination of script and budget and vision to tell that story well. But for me, I learned a great deal about the differences between game storytelling and film storytelling. They are very different beasts. Hollywood works way different than Redmond, Microsoft, Xbox land. They have different rules and different ways that they work. But for me, it really clarified how much I enjoy working in games. Games just have this special ingredient that films don't. And for me, that ingredient is audience interaction. You know, I went to school and college as a theater major, acting and playwriting, and that interaction between people on stage and the audience was this sort of wonderful electric connection that you got in real time. Games are a different version of that same connection. Games are this super strange, compelling mix of audience-creator interactions that are just endlessly fascinating.
When I came on to God of War, I think there was something going on in the industry where they were starting to recognize the need for storytellers. At the time, and sometimes even still, I would get called after the game was built, and they're like, oh, we realize we need a story. So it's sort of kind of backwards engineering and forcing plot points into things. And I think one of the differentiators in God of War is David Jaffe was the kind of creator of the franchise, and in working with me, really thought through those story points and how they would work with gameplay, and it sort of raised the bar a little bit.
I need no protection.
Do not forget that it was I who made you a god, Ghost of Sparta. Do not turn your back on me.
I owe you nothing.
then you leave me no choice.
I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a game writer is to lock yourself into a linear story too early in the process. I mean, game development is all about iterating on ideas quickly, slamming together some game mechanics, figuring out what's fun, throwing away a bunch of stuff, slamming new stuff into the mix until you come up with that perfect combination of systems and core gameplay loops. And that's, you know, terrible for a story, because if you tried to write a story too early, it would just inevitably get torn apart and put back together, and you as a writer would just go crazy. So I've learned over the years that the goal is to remain as flexible as possible for as long as possible.
I think there's a debate that goes on still between designers and writers. There's always sort of that conflict of what is good for design and what is good for narrative. And in God of War 1 and 2, I always felt my job was sort of trying to keep him as human as possible, to try to bring in that humanity, and that was through the narrative. And then by 3, he was really becoming sort of a monster. So I did have people come up to me after 3 going like, God, it was harder and harder to play him because he was not a good guy anymore. So there was a moment, I remember this so clearly, where he didn't need to kill Hera, right? She's in the garden and she's just sort of pathetic and she's not stronger, and there was no reason he needed to kill her. And if you do kill her, it makes you a different character than if you don't, right? But design needed her body to make the puzzle work, so he had to kill her.
Le truc, c'est que c'est l'évolution technologique qui a fait qu'à un moment donné, les deux médiums se sont retrouvés. Parce que les graphismes ont évolué, donc le storytelling a évolué, et forcément, à travers l'évolution du storytelling, bah, tu rejoins un médium qui n'est fait que pour te raconter des histoires, qui est le cinéma. Mais là, c'est du cinéma dont tu es le héros. Et aujourd'hui, on arrive de plus en plus à ça. Le jeu vidéo devient du cinéma dont tu es le héros.
Nowadays, you have things like, you know, of course, The Last of Us, Uncharted, which are seamless in terms of how they use cutscenes and story, and they're very emotionally strong.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
Je suis très très fan de Naughty Dog. Je trouve qu'ils sont extrêmement forts pour ça. C'est-à-dire le sentiment d'immersion chez Naughty Dog est parfait. Tu regardes pour moi les moments de stress ultimes, quand tu es dans le noir, dans The Last of Us, là, dans le sous-sol, et que tu as toutes les bestioles, tu n'en peux plus. Tu t'es connecté dans ce personnage-là. Tu t'es projeté. Et le fait de te projeter et de t'immerger complètement te permet de ressentir ces émotions-là.
Les deux faisceaux se rejoignent, c'est assez bizarre, hein, mais les deux deviennent des machines à émotion, ce qui n'était absolument pas le cas avant l'arrivée de la 3D, enfin en tout cas difficilement avant l'arrivée de la 3D, etc., etc. Ça, c'est une véritable révolution, amenée en partie, c'est pas le seul, par David Cage.
Je serais dégoûté si c'était que ça, quoi. Je veux dire, si c'était juste un film interactif où de temps en temps j'appuie sur un bouton, ce que ça a pu être parfois, tu vois, en plus dans le jeu vidéo. Dans les David Cage ou quoi, où vraiment l'interaction est extrêmement limitée. Les jeux que je préfère, c'est les jeux qui allient les deux. Moi j'adore, tu vois, le dernier GTA, je le trouve génial parce que justement, t'as des moments où vraiment t'es en train de jouer, t'as des moments où c'est des courses, t'as des moments où c'est t'as plein de phases, de types de gameplay différents, mais en plus de ça, t'as l'intelligence de la narration avec un vrai scénar, des vrais dialogues, des vrais personnages qui peuvent être attachants, parfois pas, etc. T'as tout ça et t'as une intelligence de mélanger les deux.
First you take a hostage against my advice, and then you start some kind of crazy high school romance with her? Are you nuts? She's a 60-year-old housewife!
Ah, she's 57! And she thinks that I'm mature.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. 30 years of marriage to the world's angriest mob boss would make anyone insane.
Il y a un soin, il y a un talent dans la VO, enfin, tout ce qu'on aime dans le cinéma, en fait, en réalité, on le retrouve dans GTA.
Little bird'll never learn to fly if he isn't pushed out the nest!
Open world games are able to really create worlds that are their own characters that have a lot of mystery and hidden stories in them. Games don't come to life until someone picks them up and plays them. And you can craft any story you want in a game, but the reality is you're going to hand the controller to a player and they're going to pull out a gun and they're going to start shooting up your story and ignoring things and skipping cinematics and creating their own story that they tell to their friends. And in fact, the story that they make up with their friends about the adventure that they have is always going to be better than the story that you wrote.
Le jeu vidéo, surtout aujourd'hui et surtout vu la tendance, c'est-à-dire les mondes ouverts, généralement la narration vient de la tête du joueur qui s'invente lui-même des histoires et se fait son film.
Je sais qu'il y a des sensations que j'ai eues en jouant par exemple à GTA, du fait que le monde soit complètement ouvert, que je ne pourrais jamais retrouver au cinéma et qu'aucun film ne pourra jamais rendre. T'as une appréciation du temps, un rendu du temps qui ne peut pas être le même parce que tu ne peux pas au cinéma donner le temps aux gens en fait.
It's great for the player. You want to go explore things. You want to go look at that island. You want to go do this. You want to go to that planet. But when you're telling a story and there are stakes and there's an urgency to get to, go rescue whoever out of the building, you can't be like, yeah, I'll get to that guy in the building in a minute, because it just disrupts any kind of forward motion in terms of narrative. So it's hard to keep that kind of forward thinking going towards the stakes and making you feel like you accomplished something when you have all these other options.
That is God's wagon that this ship stole! Chase him, please!
You have something with sort of normal linear storytelling because you can control the pace, you can control what people see when they see it. And so there are things you can do there that you just can't do in an interactive story because you don't have the same control.
Cinema was cinema and video games were video games. They're quite different mediums and you get different kind of enjoyment out of them. I think for me, the place where they do meet is when they're inspired by one another. I mean, we're definitely heavily influenced by the look of the video game, the way video games are shot, where the virtual camera goes. Like, for example, in Resident Evil, there's always a lot of kind of overhead shots in the video game, and we kind of mimic that. In the first game, you were always going through doorways, and that's been a big theme in the Resident Evil franchise as well. We take a lot from the video games. I make sure that the cinematographers sit down and they watch playouts of the video games, see how it's shot, so that becomes almost second nature for the production designer, for the cinematographer, for the camera operators. So they start kind of like putting that almost unthinkingly into the way that we shoot the movie. Not that this is going to be a homage to this shot from Resident Evil, more like they just know about it and they're influenced by it. Because if you look at a lot of fresh visual imagery and get excited about it, you can't help but be influenced by it.
If I look at modern filmmaking now, a lot of the language of cinema is adapting a lot of the language of games in terms of sort of like perspectives, cuts, pace, how information is relayed to the viewer.
I would say if there's a contribution that video games have made to movies that will stick, I think it would be in the kind of the legitimacy of the heads-up shot. That was a kind of anomaly or a stunt. But now I think that the audience will enjoy and experience kind of a heads-up moment at great length because so much of the audience has kind of played those games.
Je suis persuadé que le jeu vidéo a profondément influencé tous les réalisateurs visuels. Mais de Spielberg à Fincher, en passant par vraiment tous. C'est juste une question de culture de l'image. C'est juste que dans quel type d'image tu baignes, quel type d'image on te montre, etc. Dans Zodiac, moi j'ai trouvé ça assez cool, quoi. La scène du taxi, tu vois, t'as la caméra qui le suit, mais face exactement à la GTA, quoi. En fait, la caméra est centrée sur la bagnole, vue du dessus en plan zénital. Je pense qu'il y a une influence immense en fait du jeu vidéo dans le cinéma de Fincher.
Le jeu vidéo aujourd'hui a créé les outils comme la performance capture, et le cinéma se l'est accaparé. Des cinéastes comme Zemeckis et Cameron se sont accaparés complètement cette technologie pour l'utiliser dans leur création d'univers. Ils scannent leurs personnages, ils font ce qu'ils veulent avec, et d'un coup ils ont une liberté absolue en tant que créateurs. C'est-à-dire qu'eux, ils s'offrent cette liberté de joueur, mais c'est les seuls qui jouent. Quand tu regardes Avatar, tu joues pas. C'est que Cameron qui joue et t'es que de son point de vue. Donc en fait, les mecs se payent des jeux vidéo à 200 millions de dollars et ils font ce qu'ils veulent avec. Donc t'es spectateur de la partie de Cameron et de la partie de Zemeckis quand il fait Beowulf, c'est lui qui joue. Quand Cameron il fait Avatar, c'est lui qui joue, mais c'est sûr qu'ils utilisent les mêmes méthodes.
What I'm trying to do with Squadron 42 is what I would say a future interactive film would be. The problem is the technology hasn't really been there to put you in the movie, so to speak, like in a first-person level to it. That's what I think the promise of the future. So if you've got this super lightweight VR you can do, and you construct a sort of narrative through line that a player by their own conscious choice will take. So the player will feel like, oh, I'm here and I'm walking around and Mark Hamill's following me and talking to me. And that would be what the version of an interactive film will be. And it would use both skill sets that you would know and need from making films, and also skill sets you would know and need from making games. So I think the future of the medium is in the direction of one of the little baby steps on the way to what I think the future of interactive, say, cinema could be.
It's really interesting because game design and gaming is a huge industry, and it's its own art form. It's an amazing art form. And then you have linear narrative and cinematic storytelling. In the middle is this undiscovered country between game design and linear narrative. And that undiscovered country is where I believe the next generation of true VR content will be created. I go to see VR demos now and I go, that's just like what I did in the Lawnmower Man. So it's a pretty interesting time for me, it's almost like I'm walking into the movies I made 20-some years ago. One aspect I think is really interesting if you look at cinema, because I come from cinema as my initial religion, and now VR is sort of my new religion. Federico Fellini, he talked about creating a world when he created cinema. And then he would go in with his camera and discover the characters and story in that world. He was essentially talking about VR and creating a kind of VR environment around himself, and then going in and making a movie in that VR environment. So cinema and VR are more connected than people imagine. It just, you have to take away the frame. It's really about bringing the artistry of cinema at the high end into this immersive discovery world that's more like a video game.
I always think back kind of romantically about the people from the silent days of movie making, like, because they got to invent the language. You know, there was like this pioneer spirit and this whole new medium that we didn't know the language of. And so I'm fascinated by that. I think VR is actually, you know, really interesting because we have to create a whole new experience, like a whole new language of how that experience is going to work, telling stories in an immersive virtual environment.
I love VR. I'd like to kind of help push the boundaries of VR and do it well. You know, because I do feel that it's important that, you know, you have filmmakers with a strong vision that are kind of pushing VR forward rather than it just being a technology and a gimmick. Because I think there is a danger that it's just a gimmick.
I get arguments from people, the naysayers, of like, oh, VR is just a gadget. It's like, how is it different than looking on the screen? Blah, blah, blah. And my experience thus far has been, oh, there are stories that are going to work better in this format.
It becomes more of a seduction because you have to seduce an audience or the participants into finding and discovering things themselves. So we have to be even more clever with our artistry and more clever with our craft. We have to create environments that are so unique and compelling that they want us to find and discover these things. It's bringing them into a world and having them want to explore that world. So how we do that? That's the challenge.
Every medium takes the last medium and tries to translate it into the new medium. So when movies first started, obviously they had the stage and they had, you know, they filmed things with sort of almost a proscenium on them because that's the language that they knew. And so it'll be interesting to see how VR plays out and how it will, you know, escape from the language we already have for cinema into something that's different. And that's extremely exciting.
I think now with VR and things like augmented reality, you know, there's going to be a fundamental shift. It's really impossible to predict where it could go from here. Any sufficiently advanced technology should be indistinguishable from magic. And I think that's where we'll be going with VR and AR in the future.
The next 5-10 years of game storytelling are going to be at least as exciting as the last 5 or 10 as we've moved from, we want to make interactive movies, to something completely different. And I'm just thankful that I'll be along for the ride.
It's going to be the most powerful and transformative medium in the history of humankind. But what can happen if it goes wrong?
Dans 20 ans, on sera dans, je sais pas, on sera dans Total Recall ou... non mais sérieux, je pense que ça va être... Tu peux partir dans ces délires, tu peux extrapoler dans ces délires-là et je pense que ça va te permettre de pouvoir avoir des aventures de fou. Mais c'est comment te déconnecter, parce que moi j'ai beaucoup joué à WoW, comment te déconnecter de ces univers-là aussi, parce que plus ça va être réaliste, plus ça va être addictif aussi. Donc à un moment donné, où va être le garde-fou de cette immersion, si en plus de ça tu as les sensations, c'est tu abandonnes ta vie de merde pour devenir Kratos et tirer des DS, quoi.